Hey guys, welcome back to the Marriage and Real Estate Podcast. We're your hosts, Kevin and Aisha Shelton. And today we are lucky to be graced by the presence of Scott Krone. Scott, thank you so much for joining us. Kevin?
Hey, Scott, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. I appreciate this opportunity.
No, thank you guys. Thank you for being on the Marriage and Real Estate Podcast. We're excited to tell our audience a little bit more about your journey. I know I'm familiar and you have a background very similar to mine coming from the commercial side. But if you want to tell our audience a little bit more about how you started your career, how you moved into the investment role, and some of the cool things that you've been able to do in your entrepreneurial journey.
I started by getting my master's in architecture. And so my professor actually owned a real estate development, architecture, and contracting firm. And so my master's thesis was a 400 unit, $100 million project. So I worked on it while in graduate school, first in the office in the morning, then in the afternoon in class, and then in the evening in homework for 3 years. And then I started my own firm, a little bit after that. I worked for him 3 years and then started my own firm. And we got into real estate development, design, build, and construction as well. So we started off in single family and then quickly went into multifamily and mixed use. And then after the crash, that's when we started getting into self-storage.
So, the funny thing is people on the commercial side, people know this, that architecture is a very clear path to kind of development. But on the, internet side, people see, architects and they're like, hey, well, how do you get into development? But larger projects need that level of architecture and engineering and kind of feasibility to understand it. So there's a very great path for people who have backgrounds in architecture to get into bigger projects like multifamily, self-storage, commercial assets, retail, stuff like that. So what was your thought process as you were going through school and you kind of got exposed to these big deals to make you go, hey, I want to do this for myself and start my own business?
Well, my first semester, so I had a month off between college and graduate school. And so when the first class of my graduate program was a trial basis, like even though I was accepted in the program, we still had to complete the first summer semester in order to be fully into the program. And that was from 9 a.m. in the morning till 5 at night. And we were in Crown Hall, which is this architectural masterpiece by Mies van der Rohe. And there was no air conditioning. It was super hot. And we're all sitting in there drawing in the middle of the summer. And it would sometimes go beyond 5 o'clock because we would, have projects due and stuff like that. But everyone was talking about the roles of a developer, the architect, and the contractor, and who really gets the job done. And, without the developer, there is no architecture. The architect is just making beautiful pictures. And so, that's when I quickly realized that the key to having a job was being on the developer side as well as doing the design and the build. And so when I got this opportunity to be the TA for my professor after that first semester, that was when I began recognizing the power of integrating all three into one company. I didn't really start off thinking I was going to have my own company when I did at 28 years old. It just came out of happenstance. So after I left that company, the CFO broke away and was starting his own development company. He was not doing the architecture, just doing the development and contracting. And they brought me in to facilitate this 90-unit, $3 million project. And so they had the finance guy, the sales guy, and the construction guy. And two guys were brothers. And none of them were talking with the other. And so my job was to bring all this information together and really come up with this financial pro forma. And when I got done with it, I said, how much money is this supposed to make? And they said, $3 million. And I said, well, you're going to lose $500,000 based upon the figures from the bank, figures from the sales, and figure from the construction. And that's when computers started getting pulled off desks and locking the offices and all this. And I'm sitting there going, I just left a job at the top 20 firm to go to the startup with these three guys. And I'm a month into my job and like, what's going on here?
Yikes.
So it became pretty clear that they couldn't afford to keep me, but they couldn't afford to lose me either. So that's when I said, hey, what if I start with you? If I start going part-time with you to keep your project going, then I can go part-time and begin being a developer on my own. And so that's what really spurred me to start my own company at the age of 28.
So did you save the project? Were they able to make money?
I got it going for about a year, and after a year, we had enough going on in my own company that I said, you guys have your feet underneath you. You have all the contracts let. You have all the people. So we both felt it was time for me to move on, and that's I went full time on my own.
No, it's fun. It's funny. I got in trouble. My degree is in construction, and I remember having a conversation with the dean of our college about exactly what you're talking about, kind of bringing everybody to the table, right? And I remember I asked him to shadow some architecture classes. I said, "Hey, I'd love to shadow these architecture classes," and it was like restaurant design and all this cool stuff. And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Well, I want to understand what they do too, so that I can make sure, we're all on the same side of the board doing the same thing." And he said, "No, that's not how this works." He's like, "They produce the drawings, you build it. If the drawings are wrong, you send it back and they do some stuff." He's like, "Whatever they do doesn't matter to you. You just build what's on the paper." And I said, "That doesn't make sense to me. If we're all on the same side of the table and we all have this common goal, it can be way more efficient if we're talking to each other." And he did not see it that way. And I actually got my hand slapped quite a bit for trying to find out, what the other people on the other sides of the table were doing so that it could be a better cohesive project. And that served me well later, but in college, it didn't serve me too well.
Well, I wish you were at our school, because I taught college architecture for 5 years. And the whole point of it was that if the design needs to follow the form, so form follows function. So this was a curriculum that Mies van der Rohe and my professor, Alfred Caldwell, came up with during the 50s and 60s. And the whole premise of it was the details of the construction should define the structure and define the details of the building. So we're having our students learn like what a footing is, how do you pour a footing, what goes in the aggregate of concrete, all these different things. So they understood all of the details, because we've seen plenty of drawings by architects where we've literally gone and said, "We can't build this.
Yeah,
like this is a waste of money because it's physically impossible to build what you've designed." And they said, "No, it's not." And we literally point out things. We do it politely, but we point out different things like, "Okay, well, this is, there's no structure here. Or how do you get the plumbing or the HVAC up or down? There's no place to do it." And, there's an art to understanding how a building goes together. So I applaud your foresight there.
No, thank you. Yeah, they definitely had a lot of things to say about architecture in our school. We went on a site tour.
Evil guys.
Yeah. And they designed this floating piece of glass, and everybody's sitting around and they're just rubbing their chin. They're like, "So how is this supposed to float in the middle of the air?" It's like, "Oh yeah." And the architect's like, "It's just supposed to be there." It's like, well, it doesn't have any wires, any string, any support, you got to figure it out. It's like, this doesn't make sense, but people don't really, if you don't put it together, you're designing something that ultimately can't get built, or you're trying to build something that wasn't designed to be built. It just doesn't work. So you got to work together to make it happen. So I'll get off my construction high horse.
Kevin is fanning out on the technical conversation that you guys are having, and I'm going to bring some balance to this marriage and real estate.
Isn't that what marriage is about?
It is. So typically our audience is people who are passionate about their marriage, but also trying to figure out what to do in real estate, how to invest in real estate, and or build a business in real estate. And so we bring couples on to talk about like how we make that work, right? And Kevin and I work together, obviously, but not everybody does. But if you're married, your partner is still the person who helps to carry some part of your life so that you can go out and do what you do in the world every day, right? And so for you and your business, we joked about this earlier, that you and your wife don't work in the business together. That's correct, right?
That is absolutely correct.
Yes. Okay. But I'd like to know how she supports you so that you can go out in the business and do what you do.
Well, first and foremost, I mean, being an entrepreneur is not an easy thing, right? Nope. It's a lot easier in many respects to be an employee and get a paycheck, know exactly what's coming in, and you can create a budget, and you can allocate your spending and all those sorts of things. And that's how my wife was raised by her father, who was a pastor, but also a business administrative pastor. So he was, what's your budget? What's this? And being an entrepreneur, it's like, I think we're going to make this, we should make this in a given year, right? You never know, right? Because there's not a given, it's like you make money when you sell something, you make something when you close a deal. So, you can't predict exactly what your revenue stream is going to be. So what my wife has done has been incredible. So she's been incredibly supportive of me pursuing my entrepreneurial dreams when I was, 28 years old. So we've been married 3 years. I began flipping a house and tearing a roof off a house that we were supposed to move into the day that she's in labor, so we went into the hospital and, I'm on the phone with the carpenter and stuff, like telling him how to, take things apart. And, so it's like, get over here, but, there was the type of thing we're sitting around waiting for so long and, but that's life, right? Family interacts with business and business interacts with family. You can't separate them. So if I didn't have someone who was supportive and encouraging me, and, we've been married almost 30 years now, I would never have been able to accomplish these things. And, when I read posts and blogs and different things about people, like, what do I do if my partner's not on board? Like, how do I get into real estate? Well, that's a tough one, because they got to be on board. They got to see the potential. They got to see what you're striving for. And it's just not real estate. It's any entrepreneurial business. If they're not a believer in you, then, you already have one strike against you.
It's funny. Everything you're saying is amazingly true, but people don't think about that when they're just jumping in the water. Like, oh, I'm going to go do this thing that could cost me everything, and I don't have to have my partner on board. Well, if that mortgage doesn't get paid, you definitely you need somebody on board. So, you talked a little bit about pivoting your business when the first kind of '08 crash hit, right?
No, that wasn't the first crash, but
not the first crash, but that was when you pivoted your business, right? Was it '08 or was it a little bit earlier than that?
No, it was '08. I mean, we pivoted a couple times, but '08, '09 was the biggest one because, we just finished. We were flipping homes every 2 years, so we moved, 7 times in 10 years.
Wow.
And we just built the final house. And I woke up and I'm hearing that Bear Stearns or Goldman Sachs, all these banks were like those didn't crash, but other ones were closed. I was just like, what is this really going to mean? No one knew what it really meant, right? And I had a business partner at the time, and he's like, why aren't we doing what we always been doing? Why are we not just doing more spec? I'm like, I can't get loans. No bank is giving us loans. We have to pivot. And he didn't want to pivot. And I'm like, we can't keep going this direction. So, he went in one direction, I went in the other, but that's where I began getting into more multifamily and self-storage, because that's where the money was. We had to follow what was available, because at that point in time, no bank was lending on anything speculative. They only wanted cash flowing assets. They didn't want any risk.
So as you pivoted, go ahead, Aisha.
I was just going to say, with hindsight being 2020, and, most of the conversations we have are with people who haven't done this yet, right? And we completely understand what you're saying, because we've had to pivot our business on several occasions as well. But I'm just thinking about how important it is, how important those pivots were, and how foundational they were to the success that you have today. Can you tell us more about how those pivots help to make you successful in what you're doing today?
Well, one, I think you have to have a mindset of growth, right? So if you don't have a mindset of growth or improving, then like my former partner, like, well, why aren't we just doing it the way we've always done it? Well, the market's not there. The conditions aren't there. We can't do that. So if we're stuck in that way, then going back, your previous comment is, if a paycheck's not coming in, guess what's going to happen? You can't make that mortgage payment. Guess what's going to happen, right? And so one of the pivots that we did is we went strictly design build. And so instead of doing work for ourselves, we were opening up to doing work for other people. And that led to the cash flow. So if you're asking me what was the repercussions of those pivots, it's the fact that, I've had a company since 1998. So, the first one was, 9/11. Then we had the internet bubble crisis. Then we had the housing crisis. And then we've had the pandemic. In each of these cases, we've been able to keep our business going and, continuing growing through that period of time.
I think that's crucial. It's funny how you find the water when you're starving, right? Or when you're thirsty, right? So, pivoting your business to design build helped increase the cash flow. We had a very similar story where we had to increase our cash flow. So we couldn't own it all. We had to do some fee-based work. We had to, pivot our business several times. So, we applaud that and love to hear the stories because they're so inspiring to us for people's journeys who are ahead of us. Like, okay, we're where we're supposed to be. When you have to pivot your business, it's a natural thing because you're going where you can thrive, not necessarily kind of wither on the vine. So as you got into self-storage, which first you said the money was in self-storage, what did you do to identify that market or identify that opportunity? And then now from where you started, then initially pivoting your business into that, where is your business grown?
Well, I wish I could say that I had this Zen moment where I was sitting on an island and I just had this epiphany, right? So it wasn't anything as glamorous as that. And people say, did you always want to be in the self-storage? And I'm like, no, I didn't grow up thinking that I wanted to own lockers. Like, come on. That's no one's aspiration. It's like 5-year-old, right? So I actually had a client who attended a work boot camp and was talking about buying distressed self-storage. So I was real estate coaching at the time too. I left teaching college architecture to do real estate coaching. And, he was explaining to me the model. And I was like, okay, well, this is just a simplified version of an apartment building. It's apartments without toilets. So, if I'm looking at the layout, I'm looking at circulation space, I'm looking at gross rentable square feet and what how much we can get for that and all those sorts of things. But as we studied the model, he couldn't find a distressed self-storage. It was really hard. And so, it's like, is it an 8 cap or a 9 cap? Well, those are all equally good conversations, but that's not going to say, that's not where you're going to create generational wealth. That's where you're going to create income, right? Mm-hmm. And the difference between income and wealth. And so, as I was getting in, it's like, man, this model is really good. And then I went back and looked at it. I went back to 1979 when, there's the oil crisis. And I studied the occupancy level of self-storage, and in every major downturn, in every major recessionary market, self-storage dropped 1 or 2% and then rebounded 3 or 4. And it just continued to go up. And we overlapped this. And then a little over a year ago, I presented this at I was awarded an award in Vegas, and I was asked to give a speech about the real estate market. And I compared 1979 to what we're going through now. But I did this in March of last year, and I said, we're on the verge of a major recession. And people are like, no, and everyone was poo-pooing it, right? But I took 10 different factors of the economy in 1979, and I compared them to what we're going through now. This is in March of last year. I'm like, look at all these same economic factors. Mm-hmm. We are worse than we were in 1979. And so these are me reading the tea leaves of what's going on. But that was, and I said, that is the benefit of me being a history undergraduate versus an architecture undergraduate, is that I get into that looking at history and seeing the patterns and seeing what's going on. And that's how I came to this decision that, there's power in self-storage. And I deemed it recessionary resistant. So as opposed to recessionary proof.
Nice.
So, and I'm going to get technical, and Aisha, you can wean me back.
No, go ahead.
As you look at 2023, 2024, 2025, and of course, you were able to look at the tea leaves and predict, say, hey, we're going to have a major recession. Where do you see the market going? And specific to your industry, but real estate as a whole?
Well, I don't think there's going to be any changes until the next election cycle. And that's where I've been, and that was part of my analysis there, is that if we look at these election cycles, right now, the monetary and the fiscal policies are not aligned. And so we have this divergency, right? So I believe we're going to be in a continued recessionary process until there's an election change when the monetary and fiscal policy align. And at that point in time, we will have a growth again. So historically, and I said this even 2 years ago, I said historically, since Carter was the last president that we only gave one term, and the recessionary was so bad in 1979 that Reagan won 49 out of 50 states. It was the most lopsided victory, right? And after that, we've given every president 8 years to set their political agenda,
Mhm.
right? And for the most part, I mean, it did go Reagan, Bush, but then it's alternated between Republican and Democrat. It's just gone back and forth. We give one party 8 years, then we give the other party 8 years. So I said, historically, we should be giving Trump 8 years,
Mhm.
unless the fiscal policy falls apart. If his fiscal policy doesn't work, then we're going to have a change in the electionary process. And sure enough, that's somewhat, I mean, granted, he stepped on his own foot. He said some things that he shouldn't have, but people were down on the economy, which didn't help the fact of all these other things. I think he could have overcome all the other things if the economy was doing better. Now we have Biden. Again, we should be giving Biden 8 years, but if things continue to be in a downward trend,
Mhm.
Biden will predict, history predicts,
Yeah.
only have 4 years. And so I think at that point in time, the only way that the other party wins is if they present a different fiscal policy that aligns with the monetary policy.
And we have that pandemic riding on both terms, right? Like,
Right.
Trump had the beginning of it and Biden had some of it too. So it's like the underlying political tensions and social tensions, all these other things, it's just been a precursor this whole way too, right? For all
Mhm.
this change. And then it filters into the economy and filters into fiscal policy and foreign policy, and you have all these components to it. So when you look at the future, right? Like, of course, you don't have a crystal ball. Where are you investing your dollars? Where should people be investing their dollars as we go through these seasons? Other than self-storage, because I'm not gonna give you
or self-storage, and why? If it is self-storage,
okay. Well, then I'll
double down on self-storage and tell us why.
Well, we invest in self-storage because of the fact of how resilient it is in recessionary markets. Just this week in one location, we took 14 contracts, and another one we took 10 contracts. And they're granted in their lease up, but in a week, averaging over 2 rentals a day is phenomenal. I mean, typically you want to get in lease up, you want to get 1 a day, and here we're averaging over double that in a week, right? So that is why we're doubling down on that. But I mean, the bigger thing that I'm saying is that I'm investing in myself.
Mhm.
Okay. And people say, well, that's incredibly arrogant, or how do I do that? But I think we should all be investing in ourselves, right? So if we're not doing everything that we can to improve our own businesses and what we're doing, then that's going to hurt us longer going forward. So we're actually developing a whole new product, a whole new concept that I can't really describe right now, but it will be involving both multifamily and self-storage. And so we're actually going back into the multifamily arena, but it's not as simple as that. But we're looking at this trends in real estate, but also we're looking at trends within the marketplace and working to address some bigger trends that we're seeing based upon housing, workforce, storage. We're taking all these factors and combining them.
No, I love it. Are you specific to only certain markets that you're kind of bringing this concept to, or your self-storage business in general? Are you nationwide with your approach?
It will be throughout the country.
Very cool.
That's exciting. So we'll just have to sit back and wait to see what happens. We'll have to keep following you, Scott, to see what comes about. Tell me, for people who say that they want to make money in real estate or build generational wealth, it sounds like for you, self-storage is one of those things that is a pretty secure way to go from a real estate investing standpoint. Can you tell our audience how someone who has no self-storage facility, how they can go about getting a self-storage facility and or building a portfolio of self-storage facilities, much like yourself?
Absolutely. So we classify storage into 3 different classes. Okay. And it's different from, if I say class A, class B, or class C, and let's say multifamily, you're thinking like really good. Okay. And I don't want to really buy that one, right? That's not what we mean in self-storage. So when we say class C, that means like first generation, more rural, drive up type facilities where, it's your traditional vision of I want drive through, maybe it's gravel, maybe it's paved, but then there's these row of lockers and I put my stuff in there and I'm an hour outside in the country, right? And they're small, maybe like 100 or 200 units. We classify that as class C, because that's like first generation storage. And we equate those to like a penny stock. It's a good clipping coupon, that sort of thing. Not going to build generational wealth, good income, which is why a lot of mom and pops own them. Class B would be more near the suburban, maybe like 200 to 400 units, maybe climate controlled, but they'll be gated, have key, technology behind them, maybe, an entirely touchless system throughout the entire process. And we consider that a blue chip. So good, steady performer, right? A consistent performer. And then Class A is more urban, which is totally climate control. You drive into the facility. It's, the doors go down and you can unload your stuff in a dry, safe, and secure environment. And those are like from 400 to 1,000 units. And so those are investment quality type things where the REITs are looking to invest in, those type of facilities. And so that's predictive. Traditionally, what we've been doing, we've been taking underperforming commercial buildings and converting them into self-storage. So like we took the original Lincoln Log Factory and converted it into self-storage. We took the first fireproof building in Milwaukee and converted it. We took like an abandoned corporate building in downtown Dayton and converted it into self-storage. So we totally changed the use of these buildings in order to improve the wealth or the income of the building, the value of the building. So if someone's looking to get into self-storage, a Class C or Class B could be a good place to start. If they want to be the owner operator, I would suggest maybe with a Class C that get their feet on the ground, learn the business, because it is both a real estate play as well as a retail business. You can't forget that it's a retail business. You have to market. You have to, have a presence out there that people can find you and be able to pay, and how do you collect income on a regular basis, and how do you take contracts? I mean, it's much more transactional than apartments, because, someone could say, I'm moving out, and then at the end of the month, they're gone. They don't have to give you notice. They don't have to do anything. But then also you can replace them a lot quicker because it is a retail business. So that would be like a good place to start if they're looking to be more of a passive sideline than a B to A. Class B or Class A would be someone that you can invest into a portfolio, or people are buying these assets and doing it. So when people call us up and ask us, like, how do they get involved? We always ask them, what are their goals? What are their objectives? What are they trying to overcome, so that they position them correctly, so that, if they're saying, hey, I want immediate cash flow, then our speculative developments aren't appropriate for them, because we have to buy the property, build it, and begin leasing it up before there's, cash flowing income off of them.
What's typical hold time? How long do you guys hold a newly developed asset, or is it in perpetuity?
No, it's typically 5 years. Okay. And so that's what we've been doing for the past 5 years, is developing this portfolio that we have. And part of it was our brand was created out of the fact that when we were working with third-party management, big REIT names, like, big operators of self-storage, we saw how they were operating for their own business and not for ours. Like, they were using our business to suck our income and our revenue so that they could perpetuate their business, but they weren't enhancing ours. And so we got rid of them, and then we've created our own brand, One Stop Self Storage.
So you had to basically build your own infrastructure to support the retail underlying business.
Right. I mean, we had to, everything down from our logo, our phone number, our webpage, that's where I'm wearing a red coat, because of One Stop Self Storage. Is like, how do we build this entire brand that we're creating from scratch? Right. So, and then having that web presence, making sure that we have the ability to take revenue, take contracts, all via the web page, and tenant insurance, all these different things that we had to create all these systems in order to have them in place to make sure that we were be able to operate.
No, I love it. I love it. And I could go technical all day. So we definitely gonna have to follow up on that. To go into our second segment, what do you think is separating couples out that may feel stuck? Like, what advice could you give somebody to just move forward, take that next step, do that next thing to get them started in the process of investing in real estate?
Well, I think it's no different than real estate or anything else. Like, when we have a mental block, right? Let's just call it a hurdle in our lives. The thought of attacking the problem typically becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's easier to procrastinate and push it off and do something else, which might be productive. But then when you're finally forced to address it, you're like, maybe it takes you 5 minutes. You're like, oh, that was not as bad as what I originally thought, right? So the biggest thing is, understanding what are those mental blocks that are overcoming that you need to overcome. And for me, a big part of that is understanding your own personality type. I'm a big believer in a program or a concept called the Enneagram, which was developed by these 4th century monks, and they were geniuses that came up with this stuff. I don't know how they came up with this stuff, but they did. And so, one of them, it was similar to my father-in-law, which is, an intellect. And it's the analysis by paralysis, because they don't want to appear to have failed or been wrong. And so the biggest hurdle, it's just overcoming that fear of failure, right? And for someone who's that, an intellect, that's a lot harder to do than someone who, maybe a perfectionist could be too, because they always want to be perfect before they move into it. But there's other types. And I think part of that is understanding what your type is, and then recognizing that if you're one of those, that is the block or the hurdle, saying, okay, well, what do I have to do to overcome that fear? So the Enneagram, it helps us identify where we are, but the intent of it is to move beyond it for the sake of others. And so that's one of the beauties of truly understanding it, is how to grow beyond that.
It's funny, people always say generational wealth, but I think what you just said is the key, right? How do you move beyond yourself for the benefit of others? And whether that's your immediate surroundings or your future generations, you have to almost sacrifice your discomfort and get comfortable with the idea that I might have to do something different to change the future of my family for generations.
Absolutely. I took a 2.5-year program. So when I say I'm, investing in myself, that was one of the things I did for the last 2.5 years. I just completed it. It was called the Transformation Center, but working on, how to become a better leader, so that I can help make our business better. And so that was 2.5 years that I invested in, myself in order to fulfill that.
Oh man. And see, now the business come.
No, that's awesome. That's
We'll
good. What or who do you think was essential to your growth in business?
Well, going back to your first question, it was my wife. I mean, she was the one who first did that program. And to put it in perspective, she was TC9. So she was the 9th group, and I was TC17. So it was 8 groups later. Man. I was resistance, checking this thing out. I'm this sounds weird. And then, then I, dipped my toe in the water. I'm this isn't so bad. Right. And then, I still had to sign up with 2 of my buddies, because I thought it was, in case it goes bad, at least I'll have my buddies with me. And so, that was, but without that, I wouldn't be where I am today. So, I'm saying my wife, not just at TC, but my wife helped open up those doors to see where areas that I could grow and how to, become a better leader.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. I love it. I love it. Do you have a favorite real estate or business book?
Well, the book that got me knowledgeable about this whole program is called The Road Back to You. And it's by Ian Morgan Krone. No relationship, so I'm not getting any kickbacks, different spelling. But so The Road Back to You is a good precursor to understanding these concepts. But, it's dramatically changed how we do business, because I'll give you an example. Our director of construction was dealing with a design build client. He's I can't get her to make a decision. You said, hey, give her the options, present everything. He goes, I presented everything and she just won't make a decision. And I said, well, you could, maybe relate, because you're very similar. I think she's a 5. She's analysis by paralysis. Mm-hmm. So why don't you give her 2 decisions, 2 things to choose from. And then she started making decisions. It's do you want A or B? Yeah. And so, just that. And then, so not only do we look at it within our office with everybody in the company. So we each know what our numbers are. So, one's a peacekeeper, one who fears conflict. And we'll say, hey, look, this could be a little bit uncomfortable because you're gonna have to deal with some conflict here. Are you good with that? And it's not a condescending way, but it's more of hey, I'm supporting you so that if you begin feeling uncomfortable in this isn't an area for you to grow in, so that you can do your job better. But we're both going to acknowledge what that is, so that way you can get supported in that. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
it does. And I love that style of leadership. I think that kind of empathetic approach helps not only grow the staff, but also give them the ability to feel comfortable in their own skin, where they can maximize their strengths and somebody else can kind of help ease their weaknesses in the organization. So I like that.
No, that's good. As we close, can you tell me or our audience, what do you think if you're interested in self-storage and sorry, that was like, Kevin, you're frowning at me because I had a
I was
brain
just trying to understand. I'm looking at you.
You guys have been married a long time because I can't even see Kevin's eyes with his glasses and the glare.
His facial expression speaks to me right now.
No, I'm looking up. The weird thing is I always want to be cognizant of my eyes, but also
Yes.
I'm trying to look at the person speaking, but it's not directly aligned. So
Here's what I was trying to say. Okay, because we're on Zoom, and when you hear the audio version, that's why we're having this eye conversation. But what I was trying to say was, if you had any advice for couples who are like, okay, we want to do something similar to what you do, what advice do you have for them?
Learn how to understand each other and understand what their motivation is, so that you can resolve conflict. And that's going the road back to you. So my wife and I are like diametrically opposed in terms of our type. Okay. Like it says like these two types should not be married. Okay.
Me too.
And so, once I began to understand where she was coming from, when she, where I was coming from, it like opened up a whole new world. Mm-hmm. So again, it's like, how do you work through these things? Because let's face it, not everyone thinks that being a business owner is easy. Or, being an entrepreneur is easy. It's just like, unicorns and butterflies, right? It's the furthest things from the truth. You're going to have like 1,000 no's for every yes you get. And you have to be able to, rebound, and you have to be able to grow through that and be comfortable with rejection, right? And people that you really are in relationship, or, I'll give you a story. A good friend of ours was, buying a house and, remodeling it. And, I said, well, if you need, if you want me to take a look at it, if you need help, just let me know. And she goes, oh, no, you're way too expensive. I'm like, who's doing your work? And she told me. I'm like, I know they're double our price. It's like, wouldn't even show me the plans to give a bid or proposal, and this is someone I know. And some people just aren't comfortable with that, right? And you have to be able to accept that rejection and then still be in relationship with the person, right? Mm-hmm. So, it's the same thing in a marriage. You're going to have to work through these failures, these challenges. But if you don't have a mechanism for understanding where the other person's coming from, it's going to make it a lot harder.
That's really good. That's really good. Thanks so much. Tell us about where we can find you on the internet, right? Where can we find you, and what do you have going on? What should we know right now?
Well, if they want to learn, if any of your listeners want to learn more about self-storage, if they reference this show and email us at info@coda, CODA, we will give them two different things. One is a feasibility study. So when we did our Dayton project, we hired third-party consultants to assess the property, to determine the validity of the business model for self-storage. And so it's like over 100 pages, and it gives an analysis of not only the national market, but of that specific market and why self-storage does well. We will give your listeners that, as well as a self-storage deal analyzer. And if they have a project or a question about a piece of property or location, if they email us, we can set up a call and we'd be happy to go through it. We're not going to steal anyone's deal. The industry is way too small for that. We're not going to, it's not worth my time or energy to go around stealing people's deals. But we will give them a general yay or nay. I would go for this. I would not go for this. Thumbs up, thumbs down, to look at it and say it's worthwhile pursuing or it's not worthwhile pursuing. And the reason why I say that, I was speaking at a conference, and afterwards I was listening to another speaker, and she heard that I was in self-storage, so she came up to me and she said, I have 10 acres in Austin. I'm gonna convert it into self-storage. And I said, did you do a feasibility study? She goes, no, I'll do that after we start. That's why we hire the consultants to tell us, what to do once we've already started. I said, no, this feasibility studies before that to determine whether or not you should do it. Yeah. And she goes, oh, no, it's a great market. There'll be no problems. I said, I'll tell you what, give me the address and I'll do some quick research, and then I'll also give you, a quick feasibility study for it. And she gave me the address, and I Googled. This is how simple it was. I Googled the address, and I put in self-storage near me, and like 24 facilities popped up within 3 miles. Okay. Yeah. And the next day I saw her, and I said, you know what? I would not recommend it. I'm like, I don't have the exact numbers, but I'm pretty certain there's like 24 facilities like within 3 miles of your facility, and the market's oversaturated. And she said, oh no, there's not any near me. That can't be right. And so I got the study, and the national average is 7 square feet of lockers per capita.
Okay.
That's where supply equals demand. Okay. So if you're above that, you have too much supply. If you're below that, you have too little supply, and you have unmet demand. So we're always looking for facilities that are like 2 square feet of lockers per capita, or 4. We might build at 6 if we are still under 7, those sorts of things. She was at 24 square feet per square. I'm like, whatever you do not build self-storage there. This is the wrong market for you. And I don't know what she ended up doing, but that's one of the things that we'll help people with.
That's really good knowledge. It's funny. I've in my investing journey looked at some self-storage deals, just stuff, mom and pop stuff that you come across. But I've never gotten to the weeds because I'm a builder, and I am always in my own brain about the stuff that we're working on currently. But I'll definitely be reaching out to you to learn more, of course, and be able to talk the technical talk. You said info@codamg.com.
That's right.
That is right. And we will make sure that we put all that information in the show notes. And we appreciate your time. I think this was amazing. I'm a nut for technical information, history, construction, architecture, all those things in my jam. So I know Aisha's like, yeah, Kevin really liked this. Does everybody else?
No, it was good. I too love to soak up knowledge and things that I don't know. And so the industry of self-storage, I'd never considered. And I know you looked at a few deals before, but now I'm like, okay, well, maybe we can diversify, and not actively, right? But to passively invest, if it's recession proof, I'd love to passively invest in, some self-storage options. So that just opens up a world that I may have never considered before. So absolutely.
We got 10 acres in Austin for you if you want.
But again,
thank you so much for your time.
Scott. Yeah.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.